Is it
Ladies and
on?
gentlemen, what did you think? That was amazing.
Oh, it's kind of a almost a torture to have to talk after.
A little bit,
That-
yeah. It's overwhelming. I just want to say to start out, first of all, thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for hanging around for a few minutes. I am really delighted that Jamie Bernstein is with us tonight for a rather sort of unique perspective on not only the making of this film, but what the actual piece, West Side Story, is about. Because for me, and I know, actually I was blown away, I think you probably were too, by the choreography. The updated story by
Justin
Tony
Peck.
Kushner was incredible. There were a lot of geniuses who came together in 1957 to make West Side Story happen. But for me, and maybe because I'm biased, because I'm a musician, but it begins and ends with the music, and Leonard Bernstein's score, even today, sounds like it was written yesterday. It's kind of amazing. And we all know it so well, and yet it flies off the screen, it flies into your ears. It must be incredibly emotional for you to hear this, to see this.
Oh, you think it is? This is the third time I've seen this version of the film, and it's more powerful every time. And I just marvel all over again at the way my dad's music really tells the story. And at the very end, where you hear the last phrases of the song "Somewhere," where it reaches upward somewhere, and it's this beautiful C major chord, but underneath there's this F sharp. So it's like maybe we can get to that place where we all take care of each other, but underneath it's like I mean, that the music is literally telling the story.
Well, I mean,
So much emotion.
if you want to do a deep dive that way, one of the great things about West Side Story, which you all know, which revolutionized the theater, was the fact that not maybe for the first time, but certainly for the first time as effectively, everything was in service of the story, right? So the choreography was not incidental to the plot. Everything about the music was in service of the narrative. But then again, the music itself is so unbelievably, what I think is amazing about the music, is that it is incredibly direct and communicative and incredibly, not complicated, but incredibly,
It's pretty.
it's
It's
out
pretty
there.
complicated.
I mean,
but
at one point
it's
he's got
always
five-
accessible. That's
He's
what
got
the magic.
five-part counterpoint going on in the Tonight sequence, which is kind of amazing. The rumble scene still is, the music is amazing. And it's because I think he understood the power of, first of all, his timing was impeccable. And you hear that in this, the way it comes out. The timing of the music to the lyric at hand. We should also probably say a quick word in memory and honor of Stephen Sondheim,
Yes, we should.
who we just lost, 10 days ago? A week ago.
Yeah, right. Thanksgiving night.
Yeah. So,
And he was, Steve was like a part of our family. He was like an uncle to my brother and sister and me. He was always there, just like West Side Story was always there. We jokingly refer to West Side Story as our fourth sibling, because my father wrote it when I was only like 4, and I'm the eldest. So there was basically no time in the lives of my brother and sister and me when we didn't have West Side Story along for the ride. And Steve was a friend of the family, and not just a collaborator on this one project with my dad, but he was just part of the fabric of our lives. He was always over for dinner or weekend visits or summer vacations. He was really part of the family. And it's so great that they brought Steve in to do the lyrics. Originally, my father was going to write the music and the lyrics, and he actually wrote quite a few lyrics. And it was all just getting to be too much. And maybe Jerry Robbins and Arthur Lawrence perceived that perhaps my dad could use a little help, because a few years ago there was an exhibit in Carnegie Hall about my dad, and it included some legal paper lyrics in my father's handwriting. And there were these sort of like the early versions of some of the songs. And so here's my father's lyric. Maria, it's a sound like there's music playing. It's a sound like in church when they're praying. Kind of not so great. Then along comes Steve. Maria, say it loud and there's music playing. Say it soft and it's almost like praying.
Better.
Wow, that's a lyric. So it was really good that Steve came in.
There were a few awkward moments that Steve Sondheim himself referred to. I heard him say directly to me once that the line, "Tonight is full of light with suns and moons all over the place," was the single most embarrassing line that he ever wrote.
He wasn't too thrilled either with the song "I Feel Pretty" because he thought the lyrics were too kind of sort of sophisticated and clever in a way that Maria herself wouldn't necessarily be singing in English. So he thought that the line, "It's alarming how charming I feel," was too like Noel Coward or something, and that it didn't ring true, he felt, for Maria. But I have noticed that people in the world really don't care about this at all.
No, not at all. And in fact,
nobody minds but Steve.
One of the most touching things is that there was a little snippet of an interview with Sondheim not that many weeks ago, really just before he died, and somebody asked him, I can't remember who the interview was with, what he thought of this movie, because he did see it, and he really liked it. So now the question is impossible to answer. What would your dad have thought of this movie?
Oh, he would have loved it. He would have loved it. And, you know, he was a little ambivalent about the first film. And my dad couldn't, he was too busy to actually be hands-on when they filmed the first time around. He was off conducting whatever he was doing. And so if he didn't like things, he didn't feel he could say anything about it because he wasn't there. So whoever was working on it, like, okay, but there were some arrangements that he wasn't all that crazy about, and I think also he would be thrilled to see an honest-to-gosh Latinx cast playing the sharks. I think that would have meant the world to him. Really.
So on that subject, I thought the inclusion of Rita Moreno as the old lady was incredibly touching.
Yeah, then let's hear it for Tony Kushner, because he's the one who came up with this whole idea in his screenplay, that there should be, instead of having Doc, who runs the drugstore, that in this version, Doc has died and his widow, Valentina, is running the drugstore, and she's Puerto Riqueña, which automatically gives so much more connection for her with Tony when he falls in love with Maria. She's really identifying with their relationship, and it just gives it all so much more, grounding and meaning and intensity. And Rita Moreno's incredible. Isn't she incredible? And do you know that today is her 90th birthday?
Wow.
Happy birthday, Rita. Yeah.
Why not?
Let's hear it for Rita. And I don't know, if you've been catching any of the, PR that was happening in the last 2 weeks for this film's opening. And Rita Moreno was out there kicking it. She was on all the shows, the late nights and radio interviews. And I mean, she worked it as hard as somebody a third her age. Just astonishing.
Well, she said publicly that this show back in 1957 changed her life. And the loyalty that she has, the loyalty that every American theater person and musician has to this music and to this show is kind of amazing, because it did change theater, and it did change the way people thought. I mean, for me, this is almost like, not almost, it's an opera. It is an opera with a lot of choreography. Maybe less so in the first film version. The show certainly for me was, in a way, but this brought it back. This seems more authentic than the first film version.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that's true. And one of the things that made Rita Moreno's participation so gigantic and resonant is that for the first time, young girls, Latinx and also Black young women back in the 1960s who saw this movie were seeing a role model for the first time on the screen. And I've talked to so many actresses who are either Black or Latinx who said, oh my God, when I saw Rita Moreno up on that screen, it changed my life. It made me realize I could do that. I could be that. That was just huge.
Yeah. I have only about 37 questions more to ask, but part of this getting together tonight is the chance to ask Jamie anything you would like. Does anyone have a question?
Yes, right here.
The question was, how did Leonard Bernstein get together with so many other talented people in the first place?
You know that phenomenon called a syzygy, when all the planets align. This is what happened with West Side Story. There was a syzygy of these four unbelievably talented young theater guys. And he already knew Jerry Robbins. And I think Jerry Robbins had actually worked on The Town to some degree. And so they knew each other. And the way Jerry and my father met is that my father was living in a little studio apartment in Carnegie Hall. And there was a knock on the door, and he opens the door, and there stands a like 23-year-old Jerry Robbins introducing himself and saying, I have this idea for a ballet about 3 sailors in New York City, and somebody told me that you might be the right guy to write the score. So they went down to the Russian tea room to have lunch together, and Jerry's telling my dad about his idea, and he wants it to be jazzy and really urban and contemporary. And my father said, oh, it's funny you say that, because just this morning I had this little idea. And he draws staff line on the napkin and writes down, dun, dun, da, 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 dun, da, 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 da. And Jerry goes, that's it. That's exactly what I meant. Let's go work on it right now. And they went back up to the studio apartment and started writing Fancy Free. And that was the ballet that became a huge hit. And out of Fancy Free, they devised the musical, their first one, on The Town. So that's how that went.
Well, I think, and without, I'm not that old that I can say, everything was better back in the day, now, but there was something about New York in the 40s, the 50s, and I can say this with a little bit of ownership because my father was also part of that circle, not in the musical theater world, but in the classical music world, which was very much a part of Bernstein world, right? So here was this situation. We lived in an apartment building in New York directly across the hall from Lenny's best friend, Adolph Green. Adolph and Phyllis lived across the hall, and Adolph Green, of course, with Betty Comden, were the lyricists and the stars of On the Town, right? But there was this foment of artistic creativity in that time, which was crazy.
Also, I think in those days, it was a lot easier to put on a show. They had so many more shows on Broadway. It cost less money, and the whole process was less fraught and intense, and you could just kind of throw shows together just like that, and they did.
But I think also there was the idea, and this really sticks with me when I think about West Side Story, although he was writing West Side Story and Candide basically simultaneously. Not everybody knows that. And those two shows are so different. I mean, if you want a perfect example of how versatile he was as a composer, the sound world, the intent of that music in Candide, which is genius, is completely different from West Side Story.
And yet, there was a little cross-pollination between the two shows. It is incredible but true that 2 songs in West Side Story originated in Candide. And one of them is One Hand, One Heart, which you can sort of imagine might have fit into Candide, but they cut it because it wasn't funny enough. And it ended up in West Side Story. But the second song that started in Candide, you want to guess? Do you know what it is? Go ahead. I'll give you
The
two
West Side
chances.
Story song, which
The song
was
in West Side Story that started
started
in
in
Candide.
Candide.
You get two guesses. Go ahead.
well, the obvious one would be Tonight, but it's not that
Nope.
because that's too easy.
You get one more.
Okay, hold on. I'm just running down the. It's obviously an improbable one. Not A Boy Like That Can Kill Your Brother.
Nope.
No.
You know what it is?
Wait.
Officer Krupke.
You see,
Isn't that insane?
but that actually makes sense because that's caricature and it's funny.
Yeah, and it's vaudeville.
Yeah.
And that would fit in both contexts. It was in the casino scene.
But I think to answer the question that you asked, but also to point to this idea.
And we should let them ask more questions.
Of course, but just the idea that there was so much risk-taking, right? You had the original Candide being written by Lillian Hellman, for God's sakes. And so there was this idea, okay, we're going to make a show, but we're not going to really do anything that was done before. We're going to do something completely different. And that kind of intrepid courage, that's redundant. Courage, let's leave it at that, was, I think, a hallmark of the work that all of these people did. Another question? Oh, great.
Oh, there's one right here.
The first film that we're all familiar with from the 60s, none of the four principals sang. They were dubbed by other singers. I was wondering, in this production, it's so wonderful. Everyone is singing their own roles. Was there ever a time, a consideration, where you thought, well, we'll get someone to do this and we'll get it?
Oh, no, and it was Steven Spielberg's idea from the beginning to have the authenticity of the actors actually singing their own songs and their own lines. It's one of the painful elements in the first West Side Story that Natalie Wood is not actually singing. And what's really terrible is that they told her that she would be singing, and she recorded all her material, and they didn't tell her that they were planning, or eventually decided, to not use her vocals at all, and instead they brought in Marnie Nixon, who got no credit. Marnie Nixon was fabulous, and she also did the singing for Audrey Hepburn in My Fair Lady film, and didn't get credit for that either. She did finally, decades later, get acknowledged for what she had done in all those films with her beautiful voice. But so it's not a pretty story at all. So Mr. Spielberg was absolutely hell-bent on righting that particular wrong in his film, and he did. And he had a fantastic vocal supervisor, Janine Tesori, who is herself a brilliant composer. She wrote Fun Home, and she wrote Caroline or Change, which is on Broadway right now. Yeah, it's on Broadway. It's at Studio 54, and it's unbelievable. So she is a complete mega talent herself, but took on this task as being the vocal supervisor, and she's the one who got Ansel Elgort to really sound as wonderful as he sounds. And he was not really a trained singer particularly, and she got him there. So Janine Tesori gets a huge hats off. Any other questions? Any questions?
Sir, in the back.
Yeah, the microphone is coming to you right now.
I'm curious about the collaboration between your father and Sondheim, and how much Sondheim's thoughts about lyrics caused your father, if at all, to change the music. They're wonderfully sophisticated and complex lyrics, and it seems to be the music also, especially in that duet between Maria and Anita. And I'm wondering if you know about that collaboration.
Well, you know, I don't really know the nuts and bolts. Steve once told me that the only time they ever worked together in the same room simultaneously, instead of going off in their corners and developing stuff and then bringing it to each other, the one time that they worked together was on Something's Coming, which they wrote while the show was already in rehearsals for the, for the opening. It was the last number they put into the show. And Steve talked about how exciting it was that they worked that way on that particular number and that it meant a lot to him. But in general, they would work separately and then get together and then, fine tune. But my dad had a really different way of working with Jerry Robbins. And this is so crazy. But what used to happen is that my father would be sitting at the piano playing whatever he had just written for Jerry to choreograph. And Jerry would stand behind my father with his hands on my father's shoulders. And he would say, yeah, that's good. But I need 4 more bars right there. And then my father would sort of improvise something. And Jerry would say, yeah, that's good. Play that again. Okay, now go to this part. And I need 8 bars right here. And something like this, make it a little faster and a little swimmier right there. Like he was like steering the boat. It was kind of supernatural what the two of them would do together.
Well, he had a reputation for being a little terrifying.
He was terrifying, but they worked very well together.
They did. Stephen Sondheim said publicly that, well, first of all, they spent a lot of time doing crossword puzzles. That's a famous little story.
Yeah,
they both
were
loved
huge
words.
word maniacs.
Yeah.
Both Steve and my father, and they would compete fiercely with each other over the word games that they played.
But the general bent of Sondheim, at least for this show, was to make it a little bit more vernacular. And as he put it, Lenny liked poetry. And Sondheim was trying to write, obviously poetically, in prose. And so I think that conflict made the show better. There was one famous little story I read about the line, put that in your, smoke on your pipe and put that in. So to show the awkwardness of English as a second language, they changed, put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Also, so it would rhyme with Manhattan.
Well, there's that too, yeah.
Which is the main reason.
But that kind of torturous trying to work things out was part of the process.
But you know what the big struggle was for my dad writing this score is that he kept wanting to push it more in the direction of opera. And the other 3 collaborators were constantly pulling him back from it. And actually, Arthur Lawrence at the Broadway Memorial for my dad recounted how he was always yelling at my dad and saying, "That's fucking opera. That's fucking opera." And they really wanted to cut the big duet between Maria and Anita, A Boy Like That, because it was way too operatic. And that was finally when my father put his foot down and he said, "I'm not cutting this number."
Well, contrapuntally, that song is pretty amazing. I mean, that song is really sophisticated. I just want to point out something.
It is pretty operatic.
But one of Leonard Bernstein's hallmarks was that he truly believed that music could reach anybody. And he didn't really see a difference he only saw a difference between good music and bad music, not in compartmentalizing it. Cut me off here if I'm stepping on your...
No, it's totally true. He was always pulling down the walls between genres. That's what's so fun about West Side Story is that he got to use Latin American music to represent the Sharks, and he got to use bebop jazz to represent the Jets, and then had the music, the different kinds of music clashing with each other, telling the story just as well as the words did.
And remember also, New York was changing incredibly fast, and American music was changing incredibly fast post-World War II. Yes, he was born in Brookline, Massachusetts, but he really was a New Yorker. So all of this stuff that he was soaking up like a sponge immediately became part of his vernacular. That's number one. Number two is, Mozart liked nothing better than after the premiere of one of his operas, he would walk in the street and ordinary people were whistling the tunes. I don't think that to call West Side Story an opera would have been to Lenny Bernstein a pejorative. On the contrary, he wanted to make popular all of that.
And that's why he actually did that recording of West Side Story with opera singers, because he wanted to make the case too that the show could be as comfortable in an opera house with operatically trained singers as in a Broadway theater with Broadway trained singers. And I think he made the case.
I have a question, because I know how involved your family is with all things relating to his music. How much input did either Spielberg or Tony Kushner or the name of the choreographer who updated?
Justin Peck.
How much input did they solicit from all of you guys?
Oh, well, I have to tell you that Steven Spielberg is the nicest, menschiest guy I've ever met. It's kind of insane how modest and real he is and warm, and he kind of adopted my brother and sister and me. He just loved us and liked having us around. My brother was our West Side Story man on the spot. So Alexander was at almost all the shoots and got really close to Steven Spielberg, who would refer to himself around us as Uncle Steve. And his joke was that there were two Uncle Steves, and then on the night of the premiere last week, he said how sad he was that now he was the only Uncle Steve. So he's like that. He's just warm. So we felt very involved, but of course, when it came to the nuts and bolts of making the film, we were only to be consulted about the music and not anything else. And that was okay with us. That was completely appropriate. But we were very involved with the music, and you know, he really always asked us if it was okay, if we could do it this way, if we could do it that way, and you know, we were very consulted.
Did you all notice some of the visual touches, having nothing to do with the score or the work itself, but just from a film point of view?
Janusz Kaminski. That's the name of the cinematographer. A genius.
Yeah. So like the shadows coming together in the rumble
That's my
scene.
favorite shot.
But even the opening. So I thought, I mean, this was
Yeah.
alluded to in the New York Times piece on the movie. It's interesting because this is very updated. The narrative is updated, the language is updated, the physicality of the show is updated, and yet it starts with just pre-Lincoln Center, New York, and it even has little references to Robert Moses and the whole gentrification of the Upper West Side. It's it's playing with you in a really interesting way.
That's all Tony Kushner. That's the genius of Tony Kushner.
It's
adding
fantastic.
that underpinning of meaning. Yes.
Oh,
Here comes the mic. Here comes your microphone.
It was a huge set, you know, with just.
It wasn't a set.
Where was it shot?
He
Where was it
took
shot?
over entire city blocks. He filmed in Harlem, and a lot of the film was filmed. I think it was Paterson, New Jersey, because I mean, sadly for Paterson, they're so run down that they have these entire neighborhoods that are basically, you know, in the same shape they were in back in the 1950s and 60s. All those tenement buildings with the fire escapes, there they all are, and everything's kind of a mess on the streets. And apparently Steven Spielberg said, "Don't pick up anything. Just leave it exactly the way it is. It's perfect." So a lot of it was filmed there. But I just met a person last week who said, there was this one morning a couple of summers ago when I heard all this racket out on the street, and I looked out my window, and there were all these movie cameras and all these people dancing, and it was America being filmed right in front of her building in Harlem.
Did they use some of the extras from Paterson? Some of the extras?
Oh, I'm sure they found extras from everywhere.
Everywhere.
Nothing was computer generated. You know what? I don't know that for a certainty. There might have been some CGI, possibly in the opening, with all those cranes, but it was basically, I don't know if there was CGI, but I know that Steven Spielberg was out there in the street filming day after day and week after week and month after month.
Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry, I guess I jumped here. Hello? On a personal note, what is one of your fondest memories of your dad?
One of my fondest memories of my dad, well, this
Easy
is the moment when I get to plug my book. Because, you know, you'll find all my fondest moments right there in the book, which is called Famous Father Girl, and there are still some copies here if anybody wants to get one. I'll sign it for you and everything. And by the way, the title is what my second grade classmate, Lisa, used to call me to tease me. famous father girl. Because he was famous because he was on television with the young people's concerts. And so everybody knew who Leonard Bernstein was back then in the 60s, you know? Yes?
First of all, thank you for being here. It's really a
Oh, thank you for being here.
Well.
Thank you to everybody for seeing the movie.
my understanding is that the original production didn't get such great reviews. Is that true or not? And if it is true, to what extent did you have an insight into what the collaborators might have thought about that?
You're right. I think that really people didn't know what had hit them with West Side Story when it opened on Broadway because it was so shocking. There had never been a musical with dead bodies on the stage, and at the end, and gunshots and knife fights and youch. This was on some other level. And one of the reviews the next morning, I think in the Herald Tribune, the first line was, "The radioactive fallout is still descending on Broadway this morning." And is that a rave or is that something else? They were in shock. But my favorite review came from a critic in Seattle, in the Seattle Times, who wrote, "Perhaps the story is a little too reminiscent of Romeo and Juliet." You think?
Yeah. Except it's got a happy ending because Maria lives.
Well, you call that happy?
I'm just saying, it could have been worse.
Isn't it weird that
I'm
they
always looking
decided
for
to let
silver
Maria
linings.
live? I think it's weird that they let her live.
You think it's weird that they let her live?
Yeah, I do. I do. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but when I see West Side Story in a stage production, every single time I see it on a stage, at the end, when Chino shoots Tony, this little thought goes through my head, unbidden. Maybe this time the ambulance will come in time and they'll save Tony's life. This little thought literally goes through my head every time. And the ambulance never comes.
Shocking. And we don't want to keep everybody too late, but if there are a couple of questions?
Here.
About the choreography, was the Jerome Robbins Foundation consulted about this? I know Justin
Were
Peck.
they ever?
Well,
And I have to tell you that I was amazed that the Jerome Robbins Trust or Foundation, whatever that entity is called, gave permission for other choreography besides Robbins in this film. Because usually they're ferocious about preserving the Robbins choreography, and there have been productions over the years where other choreography was used, but everyone had to fight tooth and nail to get the Robbins people to agree to let that happen. So I was very impressed that they let Steven Spielberg use different choreography, but I will say that Justin Peck's choreography uses many of the Robbins elements and is almost like an homage
it is
to the Robbins choreography.
Totally.
So
You could see that.
I bet you the Robbins people liked that.
It's a beautiful rendering, a
It is.
wonderful
It's
homogeneous
great.
thing.
I mean,
It's new.
how about the way they did Cool? Wasn't
Oh.
that amazing?
That was cool.
It was really cool. By golly, it was cool.
And actually, you have to do a shout out to the actors themselves because, boy, they can really dance.
They can
They
really
really
dance.
dance.
It's true. It's really true. They're all amazing. They can dance, they can sing, and they can act. The proverbial triple threat, right? Do we
Did
have
I see
time
a hand?
for a little more?
One more, two more questions? Yes.
Here comes your mic.
Hi. Just curious if you could speak to, I had read some things about, initially the story was going to be an interreligious sort of thing and not an interracial.
Sure. So the original concept that Jerry Robbins and Arthur Lawrence were cooking up with my dad, this was way before Steve Sondheim came into the picture, was not about Jets and Sharks at all. It was going to be about two street gangs on the Lower East Side, and one street gang was going to be And it wasn't about street gangs at all. It was about Jews versus Catholics. Okay, and so the Romeo and Juliet characters would be Jewish and Catholic, and all the tempers were going to flare up over the Easter and Passover holidays, you see. But they just were not getting any traction with this idea. Plus, there was a.
I wonder why.
Yeah, and there was a play back then called A.B.'s Irish Rose, and it had sort of the same idea. So like they just were not getting anywhere with this idea at all. And then the story varies, but either Jerry or Arthur read an article in LA about these gang wars between Chicano gangs and white gangs. And the light bulb went on. And they thought, well, we don't know anything about LA, but we could do this back in New York City with Puerto Ricans. And bingo, the whole project just took off like a rocket.
One more? Anybody?
Do we have one more question?
Yes, right there. Microphone is coming, or speak up loudly.
Okay. Sing out, Louise. I did. Thank you for saying that. I agree. And I gotta say, nothing about West Side Story seems to have gone out of date one little bit. Immigration, fear of the other, racism, love trying to rise above hate. I mean, is there anything about those themes that isn't absolutely in our faces today? And so I think it's kind of miraculous that this film has come back to us in this really powerful way and grittier and more authentic. And it really speaks to all of us in this fantastic way. So I agree with you. Thanks for the comment.
And that's a great thought on which to end. I just want to reiterate.
Thank you for your question.
I just want to reiterate, and it's not just because Jamie was so generous to come and spend time with us tonight, but when you leave the theater thinking about all the great things about this movie and about the show itself, what's buzzing around in your brain is the music. That is, for me, forever. And it makes that
It's pretty
so
good.
special. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Good night, everybody. Happy holidays. Stay healthy, everybody.